When we talk about politics, we inevitably draw a straight horizontal line. We place capitalism on one side, socialism on the other, and argue about where a society belongs on that fixed one-dimensional axis. But a straight line fails to capture reality. It cannot explain how modern states continuously swing between market liberalization and social safety nets, or how they blend heavy economic regulations with explosive technological growth. To map how societies actually function, we have to shatter the linear spectrum. By applying the Brain Kinematics Model to political history, ideologies like capitalism and socialism cease to be fixed moral doctrines. Instead, they are dynamic phase states. These states do not exist in a vacuum. They emerge organically to manage the macroscopic strain fields generated when millions of citizens experience competing societal pressures. If we want to understand human history, we must stop arguing over isms as pure philosophies and start analyzing them for what they are: kinematic engineering solutions built to regulate societal tension. This approach relies on continuity theory. Rather than treating a society as a mere collection of isolated individuals, we model it as an interconnected continuum field, where forces acting on one localized node ripple outward to affect the whole. A stable field is in equilibrium, but a functioning society is constantly subjected to immense opposing systemic forces, stretching the fabric and generating localized stress. While forces like security or tradition provide the field's base texture, the primary source of dynamic tension comes from a more volatile friction. A society must simultaneously grow to survive and protect its members to remain coherent. This creates a foundational axis between justice and development. Justice demands equality, dignity, and the protection of the weak. Development demands the exact opposite allocation of energy: production, innovation, and expansion. Every government, empire, or constitution ever built acts as a temporary pressure valve. It is a mechanism designed to prioritize one of these forces to relieve the suffocating strain caused by the other. We map this mathematically. We start with a vertical axis, justice at the top, development at the bottom. We cross this with a horizontal control axis, freedom on the left, order on the right. Order relies on hierarchy. Freedom relies on competition. This grid allows us to plot ancient ideas alongside modern ones. In the Republic, Plato constructed an ideal state optimized for justice, achieved strictly through rigid hierarchical order. Contrast that with modern liberal capitalism. This system pulls heavily in the opposite direction, prioritizing rapid development strictly through competitive, unconstrained freedom. Whether an ancient philosophy or a contemporary superpower, every political entity occupies a specific coordinate in this phase space, defined by what it sacrifices to achieve its highest value. To see how a society moves across this grid, we have to zoom down to the micro level, where individual citizens live inside the continuum field. Citizens experience economic conditions as isolated events: wage insecurity, the inability to afford housing, or daily physical exhaustion. We categorize these localized experiences as strain packages. In isolation, a citizen suffering from a high-intensity strain package does not threaten the state. At the micro level, economic hardship is politically inert. At the meso level, individuals recognize identical problems and adopt a shared narrative. Their isolated strain packages phase lock into organized collective pressure. We track this pressure as delta E, measuring the gap between promised equilibrium and actual poverty. When exclusion grows, delta E expands. A massive gap in wealth can exist for centuries without sparking a revolt. Mobilization requires a gradient. When the perception of that injustice is mass communicated across the network, the strain becomes a physical, moving force. A ruling government will actively try to dissipate this rising strain gradient. They introduce minimum wage laws, expand welfare, or deploy mass media as distraction. But there is a mathematical limit. A threshold is crossed when the total accumulated strain inside the system overwhelms the institutional capacity to absorb it. When the total strain minus the system's capacity is greater than zero, the society undergoes a phase rupture. The old structural lattice breaks down and snaps into a new ideological attractor capable of managing the dominant pressure. The specific type of excess strain dictates the resulting system. A society suffocating under rigid stagnation will experience development strain, forcing a rupture toward rapid market liberalization. Conversely, when a heavily synchronized justice strain reaches critical mass, the system violently reorganizes around strict redistribution and structural equality, forming a socialist state. Revolutions are the physical phase transitions of a society overloaded by synchronized suffering. Looking back at our four-quadrant diagram, socialism cannot be defined as a single doctrine. Russian Marxism-Leninism drops into the upper right quadrant, justice combined with extreme order. This was a structural reaction to an autocratic, war-torn society experiencing total class rupture. The localized strain was resolved by replacing imperial autocracy with highly centralized, militarized state planning. Chinese Maoism faced an entirely different gradient. It adapted to widespread rural peasant poverty and foreign imperial pressure, resulting in an agrarian-focused socialist phase state. Western liberal capitalism occupies the bottom left quadrant, optimizing its entire structure for development and freedom at the expense of unified top-down equality. These are localized engineering responses, adapted to absorb the specific regional strain compositions of their time. A society rarely stays parked at one coordinate. History operates as a continuous oscillation. In the initial phase, a market system expands. It drives aggressive development, sparks technological innovation, and generates massive material surplus. But that surplus is captured unevenly. The rapid growth leaves the working class behind, generating massive latent justice strain deep within the continuum field. As that strain reaches a critical threshold, the system corrects. Organized redistribution emerges to protect the vulnerable. Over time, these rigid protections restrict growth, causing economic stagnation and triggering a completely new wave of development strain. You can trace this historical cycle as a perpetual pendulum swinging across the phase diagram, pulling society back and forth. If a government pushes too hard towards an extreme pole, sacrificing too much freedom for order or too much justice for development, the resulting strain will eventually force a violent, unavoidable correction in the opposite direction. If the extremes inevitably lead to phase ruptures and oscillation, it raises a strict engineering question. Where is the safest place on the map? The data points towards the optimum coordination zone. This is a highly stable region sitting slightly off-center, combining strong development and justice, protected by freedom and anchored by moderate order. Empirically, the countries occupying this space today are the social democracies and regulated welfare states of Northern Europe. They survive by utilizing opposing mechanisms simultaneously. They allow competitive markets to constantly vent development strain, while deploying aggressive social welfare to prevent justice strain from accumulating to the point of rupture. True political stability requires the continuous, structural maintenance of a moving equilibrium. Insight is found not in declaring victory for one ideology, but in managing the eternal friction between growth and protection.